He was sweating profusely. He kept his apartment hot. Didn't run the air conditioner. He believed sweating purified the system. It was a belief. It wasn't a belief. It was a fact. The natural processes of the body all have a function. He drank lots of fluids, and his urine was almost always very clear. He tried to just eat vegetables and fruits. He even tried to grow things hydroponically in his apartment, but he never had time to do it properly. He had shelves full of canned vegetables and fruit cocktails. Not an ideal diet, but it was practical and allowed him to always have food on hand without having to think about it too much. It didn't much matter anymore. The world was coming to an end. He put a letter full of cryptograms into an envelope and sealed it. He added it to a thick stack of envelopes tightly stuffed into a small box and put the box in a carry-on. Even though he was sweating, he put on a heavy-lined windbreaker and grabbed two small travel bags. He looked around the apartment obsessively and then put the bags down. He started opening every drawer and every cabinet. It seemed that he did that repeatedly for a while. Then he stood in the middle of the room and looked everywhere. Suddenly he ran to the kitchen and got up on the counter and searched on the top of the cabinet and retrieved another small box. He continued to walk around until he seemed almost exhausted. The expressions on his face are just small changes of thought. He was clearly used to living in his own mind. He grabbed the bags again and put them by the door. He looked around again distractedly, but he seemed to show signs of being at peace. He opened the door, put the bags on the other side. He then slammed the door behind him. He walked to an old model Volvo and put his bags on the top of a large stack of papers in the back seat. He had a large water bottle and sitting on the front seat, he took a large number of pills. He started to driving and arrived at a nondescript warehouse building. He went into the building and breezed by the receptionist. He went into a room with shelves and lab equipment. He grabbed a small personal organizer and rushed by the receptionist again. She barely acknowledged him, nor did he give her much of a glance. He got in the car and pulled off at a somewhat erratic speed. He arrived at the airport. He put the car in long-term parking at the top of a 10-story parking garage. He looked over at the landscape from the desolate roof. He walked back to the car and pulled out a spray bottle full of liquid, which he then proceeded to spray over the contents of his bag and the inside of his car, and then finally all over himself, and then the contents of his pocket, including his wallet and the money inside. And he grabbed the bags and slammed the door. The car closed. He was wet from all the liquid he had sprayed all over himself, but it would dry quickly. He took the elevator down to the bottom floor. He was alone in the elevator, and as he almost reaches the bottom, he starts to push all the other buttons very deliberately and then walks out as the doors open. He walks to the rack of a flyers for tourists and put a sealed envelope right at the clear eye line to everyone who would peruse the rack. He walked to the ticket counter and waited on the line and starts to act friendly with people who are waiting. He tried to be helpful in moving the bags for some people who are having trouble. He finally gets to the ticket counter and takes his wallet out and starts to spread the large amount of bills on the counter. "I'd like a ticket to Hong Kong, please." Female ticket agent eyed the thick wad of hundreds with curiosity. "Most people use a card. That tends to be an expensive ticket, but I'll see if I can get a good rate. Besides, you could probably rack up some great frequent flyer miles." Simon looked at her calmly and then placed his hand on her hand and said, "Thank you, darling. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. I'm just not much for modern convenience." She eyed his hands on hers, but he pulled it away quickly and smiled. She paused as she looked at the computer screen, and she said, "This is April of 2018, and lots of people are traveling. If you can wait a few days, I'm sure you can save quite a bit." "Can't be helped. It's an emergency. Just give me this damage, and I will bite my lip and pay." He finished the transaction and walked to the airport bar. He sat there waiting for a flight that won't leave for a few hours. He chatted up his waitress and the bartender. He also talked to a few customers that came and went from the lounge. In each case, he made a point of touching the person, whether it is a shoulder or a hand or an arm. got to be time for his flight, and he started to heading for his gate. It doesn't look the same as he did only a few hours earlier. He started to cough mildly into his handkerchief. But then he took his hand and wiped his face. Then he got on the plane for Hong Kong.